Well, hello there fellas. This here is an Adler 2-liter machine. It's my boss's. I had it over for an oil change and a service, and for the rest of the weekend it's mine. So let me show you what it's all about. The Adler 2-liter is quite an advanced car for its time. Built in 1939, it obviously looks quite a lot more sleek and elegant and aerodynamic than, say, a Model A Ford from 9 years earlier, but you'll also notice that it sits quite a bit lower than your average body-on-frame car. Lifting the bonnet will tell you what's going on. The engine sits behind the transmission, and the drive shaft goes towards the front axle. This car is front-wheel drive. That of course eliminates the need for a drive shaft, allows the driver's seat to come a lot closer to the road, and lowers the center of gravity very significantly compared to your traditional car of the era. The 2-liter model has a 1.9-liter engine, obviously, which outputs around 45 horsepower. Combining a comparatively small engine with a 1170 kilogram car may seem like a bad idea from a US standpoint, but the car is rated at 110 kilometers an hour tops, and the lower low-end torque is very easily hidden by a non-synchronized 4-speed column shift transmission. With the low center of gravity, you get a very modern impression of drive behind the wheel. The rack and pinion steering is completely free of any play, and besides the dry-rotted old tires, it goes through curves no worse than any car of the 1960s would. Hit the throttle while you're going through the curve. This achieves the excellent curve safety of the Adler front-wheel drive cars. German engineering is present wherever you look at the car. The suicide doors close with a satisfying thud. The seats can be adjusted further front or back. Twin wipers, screw-open split windshield, cigar lighter and ashtray were standard equipment on this car. The door hinges have Zerk fittings, and there's even a clock in the instrument panel going. Other instruments include a speedo, fuel gauge, oil pressure gauge, and, on this particular car, 2 temperature gauges, one indicating 40 degrees and the other registering 95, well. Lights and indicators are the little toggle levers, and the 2 knobs are hand throttle and choke, and it even has a glove box. While many things were very advanced for the time, others are still pretty conservative. It does away with the fuel pump and uses gravity feed instead, just like the Model A. The fuel tank is in the engine bay. Not a bad idea to go over the fluids while you're refueling, right? You may also notice there is no water pump. The cooling system works through thermosiphon entirely, and it does a pretty good job of it. Water temp climbs up to 90 degrees centigrade pretty quickly, and then it stays there for the rest of the day. Well, or it stays at 40 depending on the gauge you look on. The brakes are still steel cable. They're okay, but they require a lot of pedal effort. The Adler came with trafficators. The blinkers were added to it later on. I tried to get the trafficators to work by replacing the burnt wiring, and they did work fine while set perfectly upright. But mounted in the car at a slight slanted angle, affected by gravity and drive wind, they were just too worn out to open or close properly. This car is also a cabriolet. Open the two locks and within seconds the top opens up, robbing you of whatever little rear view you had and puts you into full-on Leni Riefenstahl mode.
Glücklich möchte ich sein und froh wie die Mädels im Büro und so verliebt das sowieso. Ach, wie würd ich fleißig sein und den ganzen Tag mich freuen, wenn ich wär abends nicht allein. Ein Kuss nach Ladenschluss, das ist der schönste Kuss, weil man den ganzen Tag drauf warten muss. Man freut sich früh um 10, schon auf ein Wiedersehen und möchte die Uhr am liebsten weiterdrehen. So geht der Tag vorbei, dann ist man frei, dann geht man bummeln, was ist schon dabei? Ein Kuss nach Ladenschluss, das ist der schönste Kuss, weil man den lieben langen Tag drauf warten muss. Feierabend, welch ein Wort, Hut auf, Mantel an und fort, jetzt fängt ein neues Leben an. Heute möchte ich ins Kino gehen, heute wird es noch wunderschön, weil ich an Liebe denken kann. Dann kommt nämlich die Hauptsache. Ein Kuss nach Ladenschluss, das ist der schönste Kuss, weil man den ganzen Tag drauf warten muss. Man freut sich früh um 10, schon auf ein Wiedersehen und möchte die Uhr am liebsten weiterdrehen. Doch ist der Tag vorbei, dann ist man frei, dann geht man bummeln, was ist schon dabei? Ein Kuss nach Ladenschluss, das ist der schönste Kuss, weil man den lieben langen Tag drauf warten muss.
Now, I didn't have this car purely for entertainment. You see, it gets rarely ever driven, and so it showed all typical signs of being a trailer queen. When I first came home, I immediately gave the engine and transmission an oil change, followed by a thorough chassis lube-up, and then fixed up a few of the issues that had come up due to neglect and infrequent use. The fuel petcock had quite an issue with clogging up all the time, leaving me stranded at the side of the road a couple of times, blowing into the fuel line to free things back up. Not much later, the gasket that had caused the clogging had disintegrated so far that it was actually leaking fuel from the handle. And with the petcock leaking where it should seal and sealed where it should leak, we drained the tank, cleaned the petcock and cut a fresh gasket using a pin punch and a hole in steel as an impromptu hole punch. The rear license plate holder had broken, so I welded it along with the second trunk handle, which had sheared off too. Quite an annoying issue was a broken reverse speed safety release. It missed a spring which kept the piece in place, preventing you from accidentally shifting into reverse instead of first. Not that that ever happened to me. Oops! But I decided to get it back working again, and if not by bending my own spring, then just by screwing in a piece of my collection. The float on the fuel gauge had sunk, but guess what was a perfect fit? 2 floats for a Model A Ford. Please do also note the interesting mechanism tugging on a piece of wire directly connected to the little indicator needle inside. Well, the electrics needed a little attention. Most connectings were corroded. Some were loose, but after a little gremlin hunting, we got the anemic horn
0,47.
to sound like a horn again. And the lights, well, they're there now.
Ja. Ich würde sagen, das hier ist Fernlicht und das ist Abblendlicht. Durchgebrannt nehme ich an.
The Model A's are better. But the instrument panel is lit at night. Look! Yep, I think that's all I took care of. I don't think there was anything. Oh yeah! I looped the distributor. So, it's fast, it's snappy, it handles great, fuel consumption of 13 liters per 100 kilometer isn't too bad, so it's a great car all round. Throw out the Model A and get yourself an Adler, right? Well, I guess, yeah, it's a lot more advanced, but despite the advanced technology, you do notice in places that it was still new territory for the time. Take the front drive, for example. Front-wheel drive in this car also means a strange effect on the steering. If you go uphill, then the car veers to the right and it tries to pull the steering wheel out of your hand. If you're going downhill, it tends to go to the left, but it can be steered with the tip of your finger. In curves, you will notice that the tractor type of axle joints try to be constant velocity, but they're actually not. You see, when you're in the corner, the steering wheel tries to flinch and wobbles back and forth a little, while the rotation velocity of the wheels is not constant, but it's actually fluctuating. And then there's the gearbox. Sure, column shift, very advanced, but I think it's there more out of necessity rather than to make a fashion statement. I think that they had to put it there in order to be able to connect up to the gearbox without any clearance issues. And that brings two problems. Number one is force. The lever is rather short, and when you're used to the effortless shifting of the long gear lever of a 30 Ford, combined with the feel that you get where the gears are meshing and when the time has come to shift, forget that on the Adler. You have to yank it really hard, and either it goes well or the gearbox starts to complain when it doesn't. I slowly got the hang of it, but after about 350 kilometers of shifting, I noticed another issue. Ergonomy. Take a look at me shifting here. Every time I grab the lever, my wrist rubs along the steering wheel. After 4 days, it had already worn through my skin. Not a car for short-sleeved drivers, I tell ya. There is also a few big jobs that will have to be taken care of on this car. While I did the grease up, I not only noticed that this car had actually 2 front springs, making for sort of an early type of independent suspension, but also that the left front joint boot was completely shot. I put a temporary contraption out of shoelace and inner tube around it to protect it from the elements, but they are supposed to be brimmed with grease, so to avoid the drive shafts from wearing out, the boots will have to be changed as soon as possible. In Germany we have a saying, it's not pretty, but it's rare. Certainly applies here. The steering rack boots are made out of leather. I wonder if the drive shaft covers would have originally been that as well. Then there's the clutch, totally worn out, and very odd to handle. It may be the pressure plate or the throwout bearing, All I know is it takes a full pedal travel to disconnect the clutch from the gearbox in order to get into first from a standstill, and then it only takes that much at the end of pedal travel to actually get the car going or to separate the gears once you're up and rolling. If that was my car, then I would say bring it on. I mean, yes, it's quite an involved process to take off the front axles, clean them out, re-grease them, slide on new joints, take the fenders off, take the radiator off, take the gearbox out and the front axle out, and replace the clutch. But, you know, the technology that's in this car is still rather basic. It doesn't require much more than your average screwdriver and a wrench. However, here is the main problem with this car. It is incredibly rare, and so are spare parts. Go take a Google Pictures search and see how many 2-liter Adlers you can find. There is a handful of them, and getting hold of spare parts, especially like a clutch throwout bearing or a rubber joint boot, you have to have the proper connections for that. And that also brings me to my conclusion. After the week of having the car ended, I gave it back to the owner, hopped into my Model A and felt right at home. You see, the Model A may not be fast, it's sluggish and slow, and you know, words like peppy or corner handling are not words that would fit a Model A. However, the Model A is an obedient workhorse, slow and steady all day long without complaining. The Adler can develop a temper. It's meant to be a fun car. Go out on a nice summer Sunday, zip around the curves without any fear of, you know, drive shafts and technology and whatnot. Just drive for the sake of driving and not to get from A to B or, you know, having repairs and stuff like that in mind. You have a guy for that. And that's, I think, the difference that I like about the Model A. It doesn't have a temper. It's just there, and it's your companion, and it gets you everywhere, and it doesn't get into a mood. However, after 6 days of owning the car, the Adler managed to do something that the Ford hasn't in 1.5 years. It gave itself a name. I now call her Leni.
So, Wachablösung. Der A freut sich schon auf seine Heimfahrt und Leni geht jetzt wieder schlafen. Mach's gut, altes Mädchen.